She took a job as a hotel front desk worker just for a day. Desperation dressed her in borrowed clothes and pushed her through the doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where destiny waited disguised as a routine Tuesday shift. The marble floors beneath her feet had witnessed countless brief encounters, but they had never felt the electric moment when two souls, separated by billions of dollars but united by loneliness, would recognize each other across an impossible divide. What started as a survival job became the first day of the rest of her life, proving that love doesn't read bank statements. She smoothed her borrowed blazer one last time before stepping behind the marble counter, never imagining that in 8 hours, a stranger's gentle "thank you" would rewrite her entire life. Welcome to my channel, beautiful souls! Before I tell you about Judith's transformative journey, I want to welcome all our new viewers. Please introduce yourself by telling us where you're watching from in the comments below. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more love story that you will love. Now, let's step into a story that proves love can find us in the most unexpected moments. The Grand Meridian Hotel's lobby gleamed with the kind of understated elegance that whispered money rather than shouted it. Judith Martinez stood frozen for a moment, her reflection caught in the polished marble floor beneath her feet. The borrowed navy blazer hung slightly loose on her petite frame, and her hands trembled as she adjusted the temporary name tag, Judith, front desk associate. 24 hours ago, she'd been serving coffee at the diner on 5th Street, counting every tip to make rent. When her friend Jess called about a last-minute opening, the hotel's regular desk clerk had food poisoning and they needed someone for just one day. Judith didn't hesitate. $50 an hour was more than she made in a full day at the diner. Just smile, check people in, and don't break anything expensive, Jess had coached her the night before. The system's pretty straightforward. Most of these rich folks barely look at you anyway. Judith's stomach churned as she watched the real hotel staff glide effortlessly across the pristine floors. Their uniforms fit perfectly, their smiles seemed genuine, and they moved with the confidence of people who belonged in places like this. She pressed her palms against her skirt, also borrowed from Jess, and tried to channel that same assurance. The morning had mercifully been quiet. A few business travelers checking out, their interactions brief and professional. Judith managed the computer system without any major disasters, though her heart hammered every time someone approached her desk. By noon, she'd started to believe she might actually make it through the day. She glanced at her phone, 12:47 p.m. Her shift ended at 6 p.m. 5 hours and 13 minutes. She could do this. The elevator chimed softly across the lobby, and Judith looked up from the reservation screen she'd been pretending to study. A man stepped out, and something about the way he moved, unhurried, purposeful, caught her attention. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been crafted specifically for his tall frame. His dark hair was styled, but not overly so. And when he turned toward the front desk, I caught sight of tired eyes that seemed older than his face suggested. Judith's breath caught. She recognized him, not personally, but from magazines and news articles Jess sometimes left lying around. David Ramsey, the tech mogul whose company had revolutionized sustainable energy. Forbes had featured him on their cover just last month. What was he doing at the Grand Meridian? "Good afternoon." His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a warmth that surprised her. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight stubble that suggested he'd been traveling. Judith's voice came out smaller than intended. She cleared her throat. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ramsey. I have a reservation." He placed his hands on the counter, and Judith noticed that they weren't the soft, manicured hands she had expected from someone in his position. There were small scars across his knuckles, calluses that spoke of work that went beyond boardrooms and keyboards. Judith's fingers flew across the keyboard, grateful for something concrete to focus on. "Yes, here it is, the penthouse suite for 3 nights. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not impatient, not condescending, just attentive. That's right. He tilted his head slightly. Are you new here? Heat rushed to Judith's cheeks. Was it that obvious? It's my first day, she admitted, then immediately wished she could take the words back. Too much information, too honest. But instead of the dismissive nod she expected, his expression softened. First days are tough. I remember mine. Something in his tone made her look up again. He was studying her face now, not with a calculating look of someone sizing up an employee, but with genuine curiosity. What's your name? Judith. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Hotel staff were supposed to be professional, invisible. They weren't supposed to have conversations with guests, especially not guests like David Ramsey. Judith. He repeated her name like he was testing how it sounded. Well, Judith, you're doing just fine. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary. Judith felt something flutter in her chest, not just nervousness, but something warmer, more dangerous. This was exactly what she couldn't afford to do. She was here for one day to earn enough money to keep the lights on for another month. She wasn't here to develop crushes on billionaires who lived in completely different worlds. Thank you, she managed, holding out his key card with fingers that barely trembled. The elevators are just behind you, and if you need anything during your stay, please don't hesitate to call the front desk. Their fingers brushed as he took the card, and Judith felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. David's eyes widened slightly as if he'd felt it too. I will, he said quietly. Thank you, Judith. He turned and walked toward the elevators, but at the last second he glanced back. Judith quickly looked down at her computer screen, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the entire lobby could hear it. What had just happened? In 3 minutes of conversation, she'd felt more seen, more valued than she had in months of invisible service jobs. It was probably just his natural charm. Successful people were good at making others feel important. It didn't mean anything. But as the elevator doors closed and David disappeared from view, Judith touched the spot on her hand where their skin had met. The warmth lingered, and despite every rational thought in her head, she found herself hoping he would need something during his stay. Something that would bring him back to her desk. 3 hours passed in a blur of check-ins and phone calls. Judith had settled into a rhythm, her confidence growing with each successful transaction. The borrowed blazer felt less foreign now, and she'd even managed to help a confused guest find the hotel's spa without having to call for backup. At 4:15 p.m., she was updating room service requests when she heard her name. Judith? She looked up to find David standing at her desk again, but something had changed. The polished businessman from earlier looked rumpled now. His tie loosened, his hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Mr. Ramsey, she said, immediately straightening. Is everything all right with your room? He glanced around the lobby, then back at her. The room's fine. Perfect, actually. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I know this is going to sound strange, but could I ask you a favor? Judith blinked. In her brief experience with wealthy hotel guests, they didn't ask for favors, they made demands. Of course. What do you need? David looked down at his hands, those scarred knuckles now clenched into loose fists. I just got off a conference call that, well, let's just say it didn't go as planned. My company's board is making some decisions I don't agree with, and He trailed off, then looked directly into her eyes. I don't want to be alone in that suite right now. Would it be terribly unprofessional if I just stood here and talked to you for a few minutes? The vulnerability in his voice hit Judith like a physical force. This wasn't the confident mogul from the magazines. This was a man who looked lost, almost fragile. despite his expensive suit and powerful position. Judith glanced around the lobby. It was the slow period between afternoon check-ins and evening arrivals. The other staff members were busy with their own tasks. I suppose that would be okay, as long as you don't mind if I have to help other guests. Relief flooded his features. Thank you, really. He leaned against the counter close enough that she could catch a hint of his cologne, something clean and understated that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But beneath it, she detected something else, the faint scent of exhaustion and stress. Bad day? She asked gently. David let out a bitter laugh. Bad year, more like it. You'd think having money would make things simpler, but it complicates everything. Everyone wants something from you, and after a while you start to wonder if anyone sees you as more than just a bank account. Judith studied his face, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke about money. That sounds lonely. It is. The admission seemed to surprise him. God, I can't believe I just said that to a complete stranger. Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to. We don't have any expectations or judgments. We listen. David's eyes searched her face. Is that what you're doing? Just listening? Judith felt heat rise in her cheeks. The honest answer was no. She was doing much more than listening. She was memorizing the way his voice dropped when he was being sincere, cataloging the small expressions that crossed his face, feeling an inexplicable urge to reach out and smooth the worry lines from his forehead. I'm listening, she said, which was at least partially true. What about you? David asked, shifting so he was facing her more directly. First day on the job? Are you nervous? Excited? Judith hesitated. The safe answer would be something generic about being grateful for the opportunity. But something in his eyes, the same vulnerability he'd just shown her, made her want to be honest. Terrified, mostly, she admitted. This isn't really my world. I'm just filling in for someone who's sick. Tomorrow I'll be back at my regular job, serving coffee and pretending 50-cent tips are enough to pay rent. David's expression shifted, becoming more focused. What's your regular job? I work at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Usually. Judith immediately regretted the last word. She didn't need his pity. But David didn't look pitying. He looked interested. Murphy's. I know that place. I used to eat there sometimes when I was starting my first company. Worked out of a cramped office about 3 blocks away. Really? Judith couldn't hide her surprise. When was this? About 8 years ago, before everything took off. David's voice took on a distant quality. I lived on their coffee and apple pie for about 6 months. There was this waitress, older woman, maybe 60, who always made sure my cup was full, even when I could only afford 1 refill. That sounds like Dolores, Judith said, smiling despite herself. She's been there forever, still makes the best apple pie in the city. Dolores, that's right. David's face lit up with genuine warmth. Tell her David says hello, will you? She probably won't remember me, but... Are you kidding? She remembers every customer who is ever decent to her. She'll be thrilled. They fell into comfortable silence for a moment, and Judith realized something extraordinary was happening. The invisible barriers that usually existed between people like them, barriers of class and circumstance and expectation, had somehow dissolved. They were just 2 people, talking. Judith, David said, his voice quieter now, more intimate. Can I ask you another question? She nodded, not trusting her voice. When you looked at me, earlier, when I first checked in, what did you see? The question caught her off guard. Judith opened her mouth to give a safe, professional answer, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't asking as a powerful businessman or a rich guest. He was asking as someone who genuinely wanted to know. I saw someone who was tired, someone who was carrying more weight than he should have to, and... She hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. And someone who was kind. The way you spoke to me, like I mattered, that's not something I'm used to. David's breath caught, audibly. You do matter, Judith. More than you know. The words hung between them, charged with an emotion that neither of them had expected. Judith felt her heart racing as David leaned slightly closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Mr. Ramsey?" A voice interrupted them, sharp and professional. They both turned to see a woman in an expensive suit approaching the desk, her expression disapproving as she took in the scene. Judith immediately stepped back, the spell broken. "Mr. Ramsey?" David said, his voice cooling noticeably. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Plans changed," she replied curtly, then turned her attention to Judith with undisguised disdain. "I need to speak with Mr. Ramsey privately. Perhaps you could attend to your actual duties." Judith's cheeks burned with embarrassment and something deeper, shame. Of course. She had been foolish to think that moment was real, that someone like David Ramsey could actually see her as anything more than temporary entertainment. "Of course," Judith said quietly, turning back to her computer screen. "If you'll excuse me." But as David walked away with Miss Elvis, he glanced back one more time, and in that look, Judith saw an apology, a promise, and something else that made her pulse quicken. This wasn't over. What do you think of this connection forming between Judith and David? The way she's seeing through his wealth to the lonely man underneath, and how he's recognizing her worth beyond her circumstances. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to Liam's Story for more heartwarming tales. Please don't miss it. The rest of Judith's shift crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every time the elevator chimed, her heart jumped, hoping to see David's familiar figure emerge. But it was always someone else, other guests, hotel staff, delivery personnel. Never him. By 5:45 p.m., Judith had convinced herself that the conversation at her desk had been a moment of weakness on his part. Men like David Ramsey didn't form connections with women like her. They had their own circles, their own kind of people. Miss Elvis, with her sharp suit and sharper tongue, was probably exactly the type of woman who belonged in his world. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Jess said, appearing at the desk with Judith's regular clothes draped over her arm. "How'd your first day go? Any disasters?" Judith forced a smile as she accepted the familiar comfort of her jeans and sweater. "No disasters, just different than I expected." "Different how?" Jess studied her friend's face with knowing eyes. "And don't even think about lying to me. I've known you since high school." Judith glanced around the lobby, then leaned closer. "There was this guest. We talked for a while. It felt..." She struggled to find the words. "It felt real, you know, like he actually saw me." "Handsome?" "That's not the point. It's never the point, but it's always relevant. Spill." Judith sighed. "David Ramsey, the tech guy. He seemed lonely, and we just connected. But then his colleague showed up and reminded me exactly where I stand in the food chain." "Wait!" Jess grabbed Judith's arm. "David Ramsey as in billionaire David Ramsey? As in sexiest CEO under 40 according to last month's Fortune magazine? You read Fortune magazine? I read the articles about hot rich guys. Sue me." Jess shook her head in amazement. Do you have any idea how crazy this sounds? You worked here for one day and caught the attention of one of the most eligible bachelors in the country." Judith pulled away, irritation flaring. "It wasn't like that. We just talked. And it doesn't matter anyway, because I'll never see him again." "Never see who again?" Both women turned to find David standing behind them, having approached so quietly they hadn't heard him. He'd changed clothes. Gone was the rumpled business suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and more devastatingly attractive. "Mr. Ramsey," Judith stammered, acutely aware of how she must look in her borrowed clothes. "I was just finishing up my shift." "I know. I was hoping to catch you before you left." David's eyes flicked to Jess, who was staring at him with undisguised fascination. "Could we talk for a minute, privately?" Jess, bless her, took the hint immediately. "I'll just go. Do something else. Somewhere else. Far away." She grabbed Judith's shoulder and whispered, "Call me immediately," before practically skipping away. Judith watched her friend disappear, then turned back to David, her heart hammering. "What did you want to talk about?" David ran his hair through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. "I wanted to apologize for earlier. The way Miss Elvis spoke to you was unacceptable, and I should have said something." "You don't owe me an apology. She was right. I was neglecting my duties." Judith kept her voice carefully neutral, professional. The brief connection they'd shared felt dangerous in retrospect, like standing too close to a fire. "No, she wasn't right." David stepped closer, his voice intense. "And you weren't neglecting anything. You were being kind to someone who needed it. And that's—" He paused, searching for words. "That's not something I encounter very often in my world." Judith felt her carefully constructed defenses wavering. "Your world and my world don't exactly overlap, Mr. Ramsey. What happened earlier was nice, but let's not pretend it was more than what it was. A wealthy guest having a bad day and a hotel employee doing her job." David's face fell. "Is that really what you think? That you were just doing your job?" "Weren't I?" Judith challenged, though her voice lacked conviction. "You needed someone to listen. I listened. Transaction complete." "It wasn't a transaction, Judith." David's voice dropped to almost a whisper, "at least not for me." The sincerity in his voice made Judith's chest tighten with something between hope and panic. This was exactly what she couldn't afford to feel. Hope was a luxury for people who had safety nets, backup plans, trust funds. People like her didn't get fairy tale endings with billionaire princes. "Look," Judith said, forcing steel into her voice, "I appreciate that you think you feel some kind of connection, but in 12 hours you'll have forgotten this conversation ever happened. You'll be back to your board meetings and your business deals and your Miss Elvis, and I'll be back to pouring coffee for truckers and trying to make rent. That's reality." David's jaw tightened. "You think you know me? You think you know what I'll remember or forget? I think I know the difference between fantasy and reality, and the reality is that people like you don't end up with people like me, not in the real world." "People like me?" David's voice took on a harder edge. "Mean successful people, wealthy people, or just people who don't serve coffee for a living?" Judith recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "That's exactly what I mean. The minute things get real, the minute we're not playing pretend in your fancy hotel lobby, your true colors show. I'm not good enough for you, and deep down, you know it." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." David reached for her, but Judith stepped back. "Don't." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." David dropped his hand, his expression cycling through hurt, frustration, and something that looked like defeat. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" "I'm going to be smart," Judith replied, though every instinct screamed at her to stay, to fight, to believe in the impossible. She turned and walked toward the employee exit, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. Behind her, she heard David call her name, but she didn't look back. Looking back would be her undoing. The employee locker room was mercifully empty. Judith sank onto the bench and buried her face in her hands, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she'd just walked away from. Not David Ramsey, the billionaire, but the man who'd stood at her desk looking lost and grateful to have someone listen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jess. "Please tell me you didn't just walk away from Prince Charming." Judith stared at the message, then typed back, "There are no princes, only frogs can afford better lily pads." But even as she sent the message, she couldn't shake the memory of the way David had said her name, like it meant something, like she meant something. Outside, the Chicago evening was turning cold, and Judith pulled her jacket tighter as she walked to the bus stop. She'd made the right choice, the smart choice, the safe choice. So why did it feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? Back in the hotel lobby, David stood alone staring at the spot where Judith had disappeared. Miss Elvis approached him, her expression disapproving. "Really, David? The help?" David turned to look at his business partner, and something in his eyes made her take a step back. "Her name is Judith," he said quietly, "and she's worth 10 of you." Then he walked to the elevator, leaving Miss Elvis standing speechless in the marble lobby. Neither of them saw Judith's forgotten name tag lying on the floor beside the front desk, a small piece of plastic that somehow looked heartbreakingly fragile against all that polished stone. Judith's Tuesday morning started with a crisis that made her forget all about billionaires and marble lobbies. The ancient coffee machine at Murphy's Diner had finally given up, spewing scalding water across the chitalvis floor and shorting out the electrical system in the process. 47 years I've been running this place," Dolores muttered, mopping up the mess while the electrician shook his head grimly. "Machine's older than you, honey, but she's never betrayed me like this." "How long until we can reopen?" Judith asked, watching their morning rush customers peer through the windows before walking away disappointed. 3 days minimum," the electrician replied. "Maybe 4 if we can't find replacement parts for wiring this old." Judith's stomach dropped. 3 days without pay meant no rent money. No rent money meant eviction. She'd been barely scraping by as it was. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," Dolores said, noticing Judith's expression. "I'll pay you anyway. Can't have my best girl starving because of a temperamental machine." But Judith knew Dolores was already struggling to keep the diner afloat. She couldn't accept charity, no matter how kindly offered. By noon, she was walking down Michigan Avenue, checking every storefront for help wanted signs, when her phone rang. "Judith, thank God." Jess's voice was breathless. "I need you to come back to the hotel, now." "What? Why?" "Patricia, the regular front desk clerk, she's in the hospital, appendicitis. They need someone to cover her shifts for the rest of the week, and I told them you were available." Judith stopped walking. "Jess, I can't go back there." "Why not? You were amazing yesterday. They specifically asked for you." "Because David Ramsey is staying there and I barely survived 1 day of trying not to fall for him. It's complicated. It's 4 days of work at $50 an hour. That's more than you make in 2 weeks at the diner. Whatever happened yesterday with Prince Charming, you can handle it like the strong, independent woman you are." Judith closed her eyes, doing the math in her head. 4 days at the hotel would not only cover her rent, but give her a small cushion for the first time in months. She couldn't afford to let pride make financial decisions for her. "Fine," she said finally, "but if this goes badly, I'm blaming you." "Deal. Get here in an hour. And wear something that makes you feel confident." An hour later, Judith stood in the Grand Meridian's lobby again, wearing her one good dress, a simple black number that Jess had insisted made her look professional but approachable. The same marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, but this time she felt less like an imposter and more like someone who had a right to be there. The morning passed smoothly. Judith checked in a family from Germany, helped an elderly couple plan their anniversary dinner, and even managed to resolve a billing dispute without calling for backup. She was starting to think she might make it through the week without seeing David at all when the elevator chimed at 2:30 p.m. He stepped out looking different than yesterday, more put together, more like the man from the magazine covers. His suit was pristine, his hair perfectly styled, and he moved with the confident stride of someone who owned whatever room he entered. But when his eyes found hers across the lobby, something in his expression shifted. Judith's breath caught as he approached her desk. All her carefully rehearsed professional greetings evaporated. "Judith?" Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a question all at once. "Mr. Ramsey," she replied, proud that her voice came out steady. "How can I help you today?" David placed his hands on the counter, the same spot where they'd touched yesterday, and Judith had to resist the urge to step back. "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "Patricia is in the hospital, appendicitis. I'm covering her shifts for the rest of the week." Judith kept her tone businesslike, even as she noticed the way his eyes searched her face. "I see." David paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "About yesterday." "There's nothing to discuss about yesterday," Judith interrupted. "Is there something I can help you with regarding your stay?" David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Actually, yes. I'm expecting several guests this evening for a business dinner. I'd like to reserve the private dining room." Judith's fingers flew over the keyboard, grateful for something concrete to focus on. "Of course. What time would you prefer?" 7 o'clock, for 6 people. As Judith made the reservation, she became aware of other guests approaching the desk. The afternoon rush was beginning, and she'd need to attend to them soon, but David made no move to leave. "Judith," he said quietly, "could we—" "Next guest, please," Judith called out, deliberately looking past David to the businessman waiting behind him. David's expression darkened, but he stepped aside. As Judith helped the next guest, she felt his eyes on her, a weight that made her skin tingle despite her best efforts to ignore him. For the next hour, David lingered in the lobby. He made phone calls near the windows, read papers in the seating area, and even stopped to chat with other guests, but always within view of the front desk. Judith tried to focus on her work, but his presence was like a magnetic field, impossible to ignore. At 4 p.m., the situation became impossible to manage. "Excuse me," David said, approaching her desk again. "I need to add 2 more guests to tonight's dinner reservation." Judith nodded without looking up. 8 total, then?" "Yes, and I'd like to request specific arrangements for the flowers." Judith finally raised her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there made her pulse quicken. Determination, intent, and something that looked dangerously like the warmth she'd seen yesterday. "What kind of arrangements?" she asked carefully. "White roses, but not the standard hotel arrangement. Something more personal. Could you handle that personally?" Judith understood what he was really asking. He wanted her to come to the private dining room. He was creating reasons for them to interact. "I'm sure our concierge can handle any special requests," she replied carefully. "I'd prefer if you handled it yourself." David's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I trust your judgment." Before Judith could respond, the elevator chimed again and Miss Elvis emerged with 2 other people in expensive suits. David's entire demeanor changed instantly. His posture straightened, his expression became cooler, more professional. "Mr. Ramsey," Miss Elvis called out, "we need to review the contracts before dinner." David's eyes flicked to Judith one more time. "Please take care of those flower arrangements personally," he said formally. "It's important that everything is perfect tonight." As he walked away with his colleagues, Judith realized she'd been holding her breath. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the phone to call the florist. She was trapped. For 4 more days, she'd have to navigate this impossible situation, working in his hotel, seeing him every day, pretending that her heart didn't race every time he said her name. The worst part was that he seemed determined not to let yesterday's conversation be the end of their story. And despite every rational thought in her head, despite every wall she'd tried to build around her heart, A traitorous part of her was glad. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. "Front desk, this is Judith." "Judith, it's David." Her grip tightened on the receiver. "Mr. Ramsey, is there something else you need for tonight?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I need you to stop calling me Mr. Ramsey when we're alone. My name is David." "We're not alone. I'm at work, and I'm a guest who's asking for something simple, the use of my first name." Judith glanced around the lobby. No one was paying attention to her phone conversation, but this felt dangerous anyway. "Is there anything else regarding your dinner arrangements?"
"Judith." His voice was patient but firm. "We're going to see each other every day for the rest of the week. We can keep pretending yesterday didn't happen, or we can acknowledge that something real passed between us and figure out what to do about it like adults." Judith's heart hammered against her ribs. "There's nothing to figure out." "Then why are your hands shaking?" Judith looked down and realized he was right. She glanced across the lobby and saw him standing by the windows, phone pressed to his ear, watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "My hands aren't shaking," she lied. "Prove it," David said softly. "Look at me." Despite every instinct screaming at her not to, Judith raised her eyes to meet his across the distance of the lobby. Even from 50 feet away, she could see the determination in his expression, the challenge. "Your shift ends at 6, he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving hers. "Mine never really ends. But tonight, after your flower arrangements are perfect and my dinner guests are satisfied, we're going to talk. Really talk. No more running away." "David," 7:30, the hotel bar, just two people having a conversation. Before Judith could protest, the line went dead. Across the lobby, David pocketed his phone and walked back toward the elevators, but not before offering her one last look that promised this was far from over. Judith set down the phone with shaking hands and tried to remember all the reasons why falling for him was impossible. She was failing miserably. At exactly 7:30, Judith stood outside the hotel bar, her palms sweating despite the cool evening air. She'd changed out of her work clothes and into jeans and a soft blue sweater, not because she wanted to look good for David, she told herself, but because her dress had coffee stains from the afternoon rush. The bar was dimly lit and surprisingly intimate, with leather booths tucked into quiet corners and soft jazz playing in the background. Judith spotted David immediately, sitting alone at a corner table, still wearing his business suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression, relief mixed with surprise, told her he hadn't been certain she'd come. "You came," he said simply, standing as she reached the table. Against my better judgment, Judith slid into the booth across from him, maintaining careful distance. "But I figured it was better to get this conversation over with than spend the next 3 days avoiding eye contact." David signaled the waitress. "What would you like to drink?" "Just water, please." "I can't afford—" "It's on me," David said quietly. "Please." Judith hesitated, then nodded. "White wine, something inexpensive." When the waitress left, an awkward silence settled between them. David traced patterns on the condensation of his beer glass, and Judith studied the grain of the wooden table, both of them seemingly unsure how to begin. "Your flower arrangements were perfect, by the way. The white roses, my guests were impressed." "I'm glad." Judith took a sip of wine when it arrived, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Did your dinner go well?" "As well as business dinners ever go." David's voice was dismissive. "A lot of talk about market projections and quarterly growth, not exactly riveting conversation." "Must be nice, though, having that kind of success." David's laugh was bitter. "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" He leaned back in his seat, studying her face. "Can I tell you something, Judith? Something I've never told anyone?" Despite every warning bell in her head, Judith found herself nodding. "I hate most of my life," David said simply. I wake up every morning in apartments and hotel suites that cost more than most people make in a year, surrounded by people who only care about what I can do for them. I attend meetings where we discuss moving numbers around on spreadsheets while real people lose their jobs. And at the end of the day, I go home to an empty penthouse and eat takeout alone. Judith felt something twist in her chest. That sounds pathetic, David supplied. It is. I built this empire thinking it would give me freedom, purpose, connection. Instead, it's become a very expensive prison. Then why don't you change it? Because I don't know how. David's voice was so quiet, Judith had to lean forward to hear him. When you've been playing a role for so long, you forget who you really are underneath it all. Judith wanted to reach across the table to offer comfort, but she kept her hands wrapped around her wine glass. What role have you been playing? The successful CEO, the brilliant innovator, the man who has it all figured out. He met her eyes. But yesterday, when I was talking to you, I felt like I could stop performing. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was seeing me, not my bank account or my reputation or what I could offer them. Judith's throat tightened. David, your turn, he said suddenly. What? Tell me something real about yourself, something you don't usually share. She took a larger sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. I don't have secrets as interesting as yours. I doubt it. Judith was quiet for a long moment, debating how much truth she could afford to share. Finally, she spoke. I'm tired of being invisible. David leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her. What do you mean? I work jobs where people look through me like I don't exist. I serve coffee to the same customers every day, and they never learn my name. I smile and nod and say, "Have a nice day," to people who see me as nothing more than a function. Judith's voice grew stronger as she continued. I have a college degree, you know, English literature. I graduated summa cum laude. What happened? Life happened. My mom got sick during my senior year, cancer. I used my college fund to pay for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Moved back home to take care of her. She died 2 months after graduation. David's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. Then I was just stuck. Couldn't afford graduate school, couldn't find entry-level jobs that paid enough to cover my student loans and living expenses, so I took temporary work, thinking it would just be until I got back on my feet. Judith laughed, but there was no humor in it. That was 3 years ago. You're not invisible, Judith, David said quietly. Not to me. That's what I don't understand. Judith finally looked directly at him. You could have anyone. Sophisticated women who speak 3 languages and know which fork to use at fancy dinners. Women who understand your world. So why are you sitting in a hotel bar with someone who serves coffee for a living? David was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much honesty the moment could bear. Finally, he said, Because, when you looked at me yesterday, you didn't see my net worth or my business achievements or my potential usefulness. You saw someone who was hurting, and you responded with kindness. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Judith felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. It wasn't kindness. It was just human decency. Same thing, David said. And apparently, it's in short supply in my circle. Your business partner, Ms. Elvis, she seemed to think I was pretty far beneath your station. David's jaw tightened. Victoria Elvis is brilliant at her job, but she has some archaic ideas about social hierarchies. Her opinion doesn't matter to me. But it matters to your world, doesn't it? The boards and investors and society pages? Probably, David admitted. But I'm starting to think I care less about my world than I thought. Before Judith could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it automatically, then felt her stomach drop. What is it? David asked, noticing her expression. My landlord. Judith said hollow with a shaking voice. "The diner's been closed, so I asked if I could pay rent a day or two late. He says if I don't have it by Friday, he's starting eviction proceedings."
David leaned forward. "How much do you need?" "No." Judith's response was immediate and sharp. "Absolutely not." "Judith, I can write you a check right now and prove every terrible thing Victoria Elvis thinks about me?" Judith's voice rose slightly, causing other patrons to glance their way. She lowered it to an angry whisper. "That I'm just another person trying to get money from you." "That's not what this would be." "Isn't it?" Judith challenged. "Rich man, poor woman, money changing hands. There's a word for arrangements like that." David recoiled as if she'd slapped him. "You think I'm trying to buy you?" "I think you're used to solving problems with money, and you can't understand why I won't let you solve mine." "I'm trying to help someone I care about." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. Judith felt her breath catch at the intensity in David's voice, the sincerity in his eyes. "You care about me?" she asked quietly. "More than I should, more than makes sense, more than is probably wise for either of us." Judith stared at him, seeing past the expensive suit and the confident exterior to the lonely man underneath. "This is crazy," she whispered. "I know. We've known each other for 2 days." "I know. Your world and my world, I don't care about worlds. I care about you." Judith felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice and the impossibility of their situation. "What are we doing, David?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to stop." Judith looked down at her hands, at the chipped nail polish and the small scar on her thumb from a childhood accident. Then she looked at David's hands, manicured but not soft, successful but not untouched by real work. Maybe, just maybe, their worlds weren't as far apart as they seemed. "I can't take your money," she said finally. "I know, but will you let me help you find another way?" Judith met his eyes, seeing hope and determination there. Against every rational thought in her head, she found herself nodding. "We'll figure it out together," David said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. This time, Judith didn't pull away. "We're getting to the heart of who they really are beneath their circumstances. Both Judith and David are showing their vulnerabilities and authentic selves. What moments are touching your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing which parts of their journey resonate with you. The emotional depth is about to get even more intense." The next morning brought an unexpected gift. Sunshine streaming through the hotel's tall windows and Judith feeling lighter than she had in months. She'd slept better than she had in weeks, despite, or perhaps because of, the conversation with David. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone with her problems. David appeared at her desk at exactly 10 a.m., carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look impossibly blue. "Good morning," he said, setting 1 cup in front of her. "Murphy's Diner Blend, black, 1 sugar." Judith stared at the cup, then at him. "How did you—" "I may have stopped by the diner this morning. Dolores remembered me. She also said to tell you that the new coffee machine will be installed tomorrow, so you'll have your job back Friday." "You bought them a new coffee machine?" "I bought them the same coffee machine they had before, just 47 years newer." David leaned against the counter, careful to maintain professional distance while other guests moved through the lobby. "Dolores insisted on paying me back in installments. Very proud woman." Judith felt tears prick her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't do it for you," David said quietly. "I did it for Dolores, and maybe a little bit for the memory of apple pie and refilled coffee cups when I was too broke to afford both." Judith took a sip of the coffee, perfect, exactly how she liked it, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Thank you." "There's more." David pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I made some calls this morning.
There's a position opening at the Children's Museum, assistant curator for their literature and storytelling programs. It's not much money to start, but there's room for growth. Judith unfolded the paper, scanning the job description with growing excitement. This is exactly what I studied for. The interview is Monday, if you want it. David's voice was carefully neutral, but Judith could see the hope in his eyes. How did you even find this? I know people. And before you get angry about me pulling strings, I didn't. I just made a phone call to tell them about a brilliant English literature graduate who is stuck in the wrong job. The rest is up to you. Judith looked up at him, overwhelmed by his efforts. Why are you doing this? Because yesterday you trusted me with your truth, David said simply. Today I wanted to give you back some possibilities. Before Judith could respond, the hotel manager approached with a harried expression. Miss Martinez, we have a situation. The Pemberton wedding party is arriving this afternoon, and there's been a mix-up with their rooms. Could you— I'll handle it, Judith said, immediately shifting into professional mode. As she pulled up the reservation system, she felt David step back to give her space to work. For the next 2 hours, Judith managed the chaos of a wedding party mix-up, coordinating with housekeeping, juggling room assignments, and personally calling other hotels to secure additional rooms. Through it all, David stayed nearby, not interfering, but available if she needed him. You're incredible at this, he said during a brief lull. The way you're managing all these moving pieces, keeping everyone calm? It's just problem-solving, Judith replied, but she felt a flush of pride at the admiration in his voice. It's leadership, David corrected. I've seen CEOs handle a lot less stressful situations with a lot less grace. By noon, the wedding crisis was resolved, and Judith finally had a moment to breathe. She found David waiting in the lobby seating area, reading emails on his phone, but looking up immediately when she approached. Crisis averted? She asked. Crisis averted, though I may never look at a seating chart the same way again. Judith sank into the chair beside him, suddenly exhausted. When's your lunch break? Judith checked her watch. I was supposed to take it an hour ago, but with everything that happened— Come on, David said, standing and extending his hand. Let me buy you lunch, somewhere that doesn't involve a hotel lobby. I can't just leave. You can and you will. Manager's orders. Judith turned to see the hotel manager approaching with an approving smile. Miss Martinez, you've more than earned a proper lunch break. Take all the time you need. Judith found herself being gently but firmly escorted outside by David, her protests dying as the fresh air hit her face. Where are we going? You'll see. 10 minutes later, they were sitting on a bench in Millennium Park, sharing a basket of sandwiches and fruit from a nearby deli. The afternoon sun was warm on Judith's face, and for the first time in days, she felt herself truly relax. This is nice, she said, watching people stroll by. Families with children, couples holding hands, business people grabbing quick lunches. Normal. Is that what you want? Normal? Judith considered the question. I want to matter. I want to do work that means something, help people, make a difference, even a small one. That's not small. That's everything. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city move around them. Judith found herself studying David's profile, noting the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the unconscious way he pushed his hair back when he was thinking. Can I ask you something? Judith said eventually. Anything. What made you want to start your company, before it became about money and board meetings and all that? David was quiet for a long moment. My father, he said finally. He worked construction his whole life. Good, honest work, but hard on his body. By the time he was 50, his back was shot, his knees were gone, and he had to take early retirement with barely enough to get by. Judith waited, sensing there was more. He always talked about clean energy, sustainable building practices. He'd see these new technologies on the news and get so excited about the possibilities. But the companies developing them were focused on luxury markets, high-end applications, nothing that would help regular contractors like him. So you wanted to make it accessible. I wanted to make it affordable. I wanted my father to be able to tell his old crew that they could retrofit buildings with clean energy systems that would pay for themselves in 2 years. David's voice grew distant. He died before I could show him the first working prototype. Judith reached over and took his hand without thinking. He would have been proud. I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if he'd recognize what the company has become. What do you mean? David turned to look at her. We've gotten so big, so focused on growth and market share, that we've lost sight of the original mission. We're developing technology for corporations that can afford million-dollar installations, not for the contractors and small business owners who need it most. Judith squeezed his hand. It's not too late to change course. Victoria would disagree. The board would definitely disagree. What do you think? David was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns across Judith's knuckles. I think maybe it's time I stopped caring so much about what other people think. That sounds terrifying, Judith said with a small smile. Terrifying, David agreed, and liberating. A group of children ran past, laughing and chasing bubbles that someone had blown into the air. Judith watched them with a wistful expression. What are you thinking about? David asked. Those kids, the way they just exist in the moment. No worries about rent or job security or whether they're good enough for the world they want to live in. You're good enough, Judith, for any world. Judith turned to study his face, seeing nothing but sincerity there. You really believe that, don't you? I know it. The question is whether you believe it. Judith felt something shift inside her chest, a wall crumbling that she'd spent years building. I'm starting to. They walked back to the hotel slowly, neither wanting the moment to end. As they reached the entrance, David stopped. Judith, he said, his voice suddenly serious, I need to tell you something. Her heart skipped. What? I have feelings for you, real feelings. Not gratitude or curiosity or whatever else you might think this is. He turned to face her fully. I know it's complicated, I know the timing is terrible, and I know we barely know each other, but I needed you to know this. Judith felt her breath catch. Every rational part of her brain screamed warnings about the impossibility of their situation, but her heart was singing a completely different song. David, she began, but he gently placed a finger against her lips. You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. Think about whether maybe, just maybe, we could figure out how to make this work. Before Judith could respond, David's phone rang. He glanced at it and grimaced. Victoria, I have to take this. As he stepped away to answer the call, Judith watched his expression change from warm to professional to frustrated. When he hung up, his face was grim. What's wrong? Judith asked. Emergency board meeting. They've moved it up to tonight. Some of our investors are getting nervous about a project I've been pushing. They want to discuss redirecting company focus. That doesn't sound good. It's not. David looked at her with an expression that seemed to memorize her features. Judith, if things go badly tonight. They won't, Judith said firmly. You're brilliant. You're passionate about your work, and you care about the right things. Trust that. David cupped her face gently with one hand. What did I deserve to you? Before Judith could answer, he leaned down and kissed her softly, right there on the busy sidewalk in front of the Grand Meridian Hotel. It was tender and sweet and full of promise, and Judith felt her last defenses crumble completely. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. To be continued, David whispered against her forehead. Judith nodded, not trusting her voice. As she watched him back into the hotel, Judith touched her lips and realized that somewhere between yesterday's resistance and today's possibilities, she had fallen completely irrevocably in love. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Judith floated through the rest of her shift on a cloud of possibility. Every time she touched her lips, she could still feel the warmth of David's kiss, the gentle pressure of his hand against her cheek. When guests asked her questions, she found herself smiling more brightly than usual. Even the hotel's marble floors seemed less cold beneath her feet. At 6 p.m., she was gathering her things when Jess appeared at the desk, practically vibrating with excitement. "Okay, spill everything. And I mean everything. You look like someone who just got kissed by Prince Charming." I couldn't suppress my smile. Maybe I did. "Judith Rodriguez Martinez, if you don't tell me every detail right now, I'm going to—" "Ladies." Both women turned to find Victoria Elvis standing behind them, her expression cold and calculating. She was perfectly dressed as always, but there was something predatory in her eyes that made Judith instinctively step back. "Miss Elvis," Judith said carefully, "actually there is." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "I'd like to have a private conversation with you. Miss Morales, wasn't it?" She looked dismissively at Jess. "I'm sure you have somewhere else to be." Jess looked between Judith and Victoria, clearly reluctant to leave. I can wait." "It's fine," Judith said, although her stomach was beginning to twist with unease. After Jess reluctantly left, Victoria gestured toward a quiet corner of the lobby. "Shall we sit?" Judith followed, her earlier euphoria rapidly evaporating. Victoria settled herself in a leather chair with the predatory grace of a cat, while Judith perched on the edge of the seat across from her. "I'll get straight to the point," Victoria began. "I know about your little romance with David." "I'm not sure what you're implying." "Please, I've seen the way you look at each other, the way he's been hovering around this lobby like a lovesick teenager." Victoria's voice was crisp, businesslike. "What I want to know is how much it's going to cost to make it stop." Judith felt as if she'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Everyone has a price, Miss Martinez. David is worth approximately $2.3 billion. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to disappear from his life permanently." The blood drained from Judith's face. "You're trying to buy me off?" "I'm trying to prevent a disaster." Leaning forward, her eyes hard, she said, "Do you have any idea what you're doing to him, to his reputation, to his company?" "I'm not doing anything to anyone. You're a distraction, a pretty little fantasy that's keeping him from making crucial business decisions." Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Judith a photograph. This was taken an hour ago. Judith stared at the image, David and her on the park bench, his hand holding hers, both of them laughing at something. It looked intimate, romantic, and completely damning.
Our investors are already nervous about David's recent emotional decisions. If they see him involved with hotel staff, a woman with no education, no background, no social standing, it will tank our stock price and destroy years of careful brand building. "I have an education," Judith said weakly, but the words felt hollow even to her. "A degree from a state school in English literature?" Victoria laughed coldly. "That's adorable. David needs someone who can navigate his world, someone who understands the complexities of his position, someone like me." Judith felt sick. "You're in love with him." "I'm in business with him. Love is a luxury people like David can't afford." Victoria's expression softened slightly, but not with kindness. "Look, I don't dislike you personally. You seem nice enough, but you're completely wrong for him, and deep down, you know it." "You don't know anything about what David and I have." "I know that 3 hours ago, David walked into an emergency board meeting completely unprepared because he'd spent the day playing house with you instead of reviewing crucial documents."
Victoria's voice turned harsh. I know that he's been so distracted by this little infatuation that he nearly lost a $100 million contract yesterday. Judith's heart sank. That's not... He didn't... Of course he didn't. He's too infatuated to see clearly. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. Let me paint you a picture of what your future looks like if you continue down this path. Every social event will be a minefield where you don't know the rules. Every business dinner will be an exercise in humiliation as you try to keep up with conversations about markets and acquisitions and global politics. You'll spend your life feeling like a fraud, and everyone around you will know it. Judith felt tears prick her eyes, but she fought them back. David doesn't care about those things. David thinks he doesn't care. But when the novelty wears off, when the reality of the situation sets in, he'll see what everyone else sees, a mistake. Victoria's voice turned almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. He'll try to be kind about it, but he'll realize that you were never going to fit into his world, and then you'll both hate each other for trying. Judith stood on shaking legs. I need to go. 75,000, Victoria called after her. Final offer. Judith turned back, her vision blurry with unshed tears. I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale, darling. The only question is price. But don't worry, when you're ready to be realistic, you know where to find me. Judith stumbled toward the exit, Victoria's words echoing in her head. In the span of 10 minutes, every doubt she'd ever had about herself and her place in David's world had been weaponized against her. Outside, the evening air felt cold against her flushed cheeks. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed to call David, needed to hear his voice telling her that Victoria was wrong, that what they had was real and worth fighting for. But before she could dial, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a link to a gossip website with the headline, Tech Billionaire's Hotel Hookup. Is David Ramsey slumming it in? The article was brutal. It featured the same photo Victoria had shown her, along with speculation about Judith's background, her job, her financial situation. The comments below were even worse, strangers dissecting her appearance, her worth, her presumed motives for gold digging. Judith sank onto a nearby bench, her whole body trembling. This was what David's life looked like. This was what loving him meant. Public scrutiny, constant judgment, having her every move analyzed and criticized by people who saw her not more than an opportunistic outsider. Her phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. Judith, I just saw the article. Are you okay? His voice was warm, concerned, and it broke something inside her chest. How did they get that picture? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Where are you? I'm coming to get you. No, the word came out sharper than she intended. Don't. I'm fine. You're not fine. I can hear it in your voice. There was shuffling on his end, the sound of movement. The board meeting ran late, but it's over. We can talk about this. How did the meeting go? Judith asked, though she already suspected the answer. David's pause told her everything. It was challenging. Some of the investors have concerns about recent company direction, and they're pushing for changes I don't agree with. Changes like what? Judith, that's not important right now. What's important is they want you to focus more on business and less on distractions. Distractions like me. Judith, no, that's not... Look, some of them mentioned the article, but I told them it was none of their business. My personal life doesn't affect my professional decisions. But Judith heard what he wasn't saying. The meeting had gone badly. The investors were concerned, and somehow she was part of the problem. I can't do this, she whispered. Can't do what? I can't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. Judith, listen to me. No, you listen. Judith's voice grew stronger, fueled by heartbreak and determination. "I've been fooling myself. Victoria was right. I don't belong in your world, and trying to pretend otherwise is only going to hurt both of us." "Victoria?" David's voice turned deadly quiet. "What? She offered me money to disappear from your life?" "She did what?" David's voice turned deadly quiet. "Whatever she said what everyone's thinking, what I should have realized from the beginning. This was a mistake, all of it." "Don't say that. Don't let her poison what we have." "What we have," Judith laughed, but it came out broken. "We have 3 days of borrowed time in a fantasy where money and class don't matter. But they do matter, David. Your whole life is proof that they matter." "Judith, please." "I'm going home," Judith said firmly. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. Don't try to fix this, because it can't be fixed." "Judith!" She hung up before he could say her name again, before the pain in his voice could break her resolve. Then she turned off her phone, buried it in her purse, and walked to the bus stop through tears that wouldn't stop falling. Behind her, the Grand Meridian Hotel rose into the darkening sky like a monument to everything she could never have. And somewhere in its marble corridors, David Ramsey was learning that love wasn't always enough to bridge the gap between two different worlds. Judith climbed onto the bus and didn't look back. Some fairy tales, she realized, were never meant to have happy endings. But even as she told herself this was for the best, her heart was screaming that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Act 8. The Choice. David stood in the hotel lobby for 20 minutes after Judith hung up her phone, staring at his phone as if he could will it to ring again. The marble floors that had seemed so elegant just days ago now felt cold and hostile beneath his feet. Everything about this place, his world, suddenly felt hollow and poisonous. He found Victoria in the hotel bar, calmly sipping a martini as if she hadn't just destroyed the best thing that had happened to him in years. "You proud of yourself?" David's voice was dangerously quiet as he slid into the booth across from her. Victoria didn't even look up from her drink. "I'm proud that I prevented you from making a career-ending mistake. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" David's hands clenched into fists on the table. "You offered her money. You treated her like a prostitute." "I treated her like what she is, a gold digger who saw an opportunity." Victoria finally met his eyes, her expression cold. "Face facts, David. She took the money and ran. Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know about her character?" "She didn't take the money." "Not yet, but she will. They always do." Victoria signaled for another drink. "You're upset now, but in a few months you'll see I was right. You'll thank me for saving you from public humiliation." David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're fired." Victoria's composure cracked for the first time. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Clean out your office. I want you gone by morning." "David, be reasonable. You can't fire me over some girl." "I'm not firing you over Judith. I'm firing you because you're a toxic, manipulative person who thinks everyone has a price." David's voice rose, causing other patrons to stare. "I'm firing you because you made me forget why I started this company in the first place." Victoria's face went pale. "If you fire me, the board will vote you out. I have their support." "Then they can vote me out." David turned to leave, then looked back. "But I'd rather lose a company than lose my soul." He walked out of the bar and straight to the elevator, his mind racing. He needed to think, needed to figure out how to fix this. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Victoria had said to Judith. In his suite, David paced the floor, replaying every conversation he'd had with Judith over the past few days. He thought about the way she'd looked at him, not with dollar signs in her eyes, but with genuine warmth and understanding. The way she'd refused his help with her rent money. The way he'd blushed when he complimented her work. Victoria was wrong. Judith wasn't a gold digger. She was scared. Scared of being hurt. scared of not being good enough, scared of a world that would judge her for daring to love someone above her supposed station. And instead of reassuring her, David let his own fears get in the way. He'd been so focused on protecting his business relationships that he'd failed to protect the one relationship that actually mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "The board is meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position on multiple fronts." David deleted the message without responding. Instead, he pulled up his contacts and started making calls. Meanwhile, across the city, Judith sat in her tiny studio apartment, staring at the want ads she'd printed from the library earlier that week. The job at the Children's Museum, David's job lead, sat on top of the pile, and every time she looked at it, her heart constricted. She couldn't take it now. Not when it came from him. Not when it would always remind her of what she'd lost. Her phone, turned back on out of habit, showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from David. She'd read the first few. "Judith, please call me back. We can fix this. Victoria is gone. I fired her. Please give me a chance to explain. I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but what we have is real." Judith stopped reading after that. It was too painful, and it didn't change anything. She might have feelings for David, but Victoria had been right about one thing. She didn't belong in his world. The gossip article made that crystal clear. A knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Judith's heart leapt. Could it be David? But when she opened the door, she found Dolores from the diner, holding a casserole dish and wearing a concerned expression. "Honey, you look like someone ran over your dog," Dolores said, pushing past Judith into the apartment. "Sit down. We're going to talk." "Dolores, I'm fine." "Don't you dare lie to me, Judith Rodriguez. I've been watching you mope around for 3 years, but this is different. This is heartbreak, and I want to know who did it and whether I need to get my baseball bat." Despite everything, Judith almost smiled. "It's complicated. Honey, I'm 73 years old. I've been married twice, divorced once, buried one husband, and raised 4 kids. Nothing is too complicated for me." Dolores settled on Judith's small couch and patted the cushion beside her. "Now spill." Judith found herself telling Dolores everything. About David, about their connection, about Victoria's cruel words and the public humiliation. Dolores listened without interrupting, her weathered face growing more thoughtful with each detail. "So let me get this straight," Dolores said when Judith finished. "This boy, he's not a boy, he's a successful businessman. This boy," Dolores continued firmly, "bought me a new coffee machine without being asked, got you a job interview in your actual field, and told some fancy business witch to go to hell because she was mean to you? It's not that simple." "It is that simple, sweetheart. Everything else is just noise." Dolores took Judith's hands in her own calloused ones. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see a girl who spent so long believing she's not good enough that she can't recognize when someone sees her worth." "But the article, the gossip, his world." "His world?" Dolores laughed. "Honey, there's only one world and we're all living in it. Some people have more money, some have less, some wear fancy suits, some wear aprons, but we all wake up every morning hoping for the same things: love, purpose, someone who sees us for who we really are." Judith felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not strong enough for what his life requires? What if it does work? What if you're stronger than you think?" Dolores squeezed her hands. "Judith, I've watched you handle drunk truckers, demanding customers, broken equipment, and your mother's illness with more grace than most people handle a paper cut. You think you can't handle some stuffy rich folks? It's different. It's not different. Mean people are mean people, whether they're wearing diamonds or work boots." Dolores stood up and walked to Judith's small window, looking out at the city lights. "You know what your mother told me before she died?" Judith's breath caught. "What?" "Her biggest worry wasn't leaving you alone. It was leaving you afraid." Dolores turned to face her. "She said you'd spent so long taking care of her that you'd forgotten how to let someone take care of you." "Mom said that?" "She also said that someday the right person would come along and see past all your walls to the amazing woman underneath. And when that happened, she hoped you'd be brave enough to let them in. Sounds to me like that day has come." After Dolores left, Judith sat alone in her tiny apartment, her friend's words echoing in her mind. She thought about her mother, about the dreams they'd shared before illness stole them away. She thought about the woman she'd been in college, confident, ambitious, unafraid to reach for what she wanted. When had she become so small? When had she started believing that she didn't deserve more than the scraps life threw at her way? Judith walked to her dresser and pulled out a small jewelry box. Inside was her mother's wedding ring, a simple band that had represented 30 years of love between two people who'd had nothing but each other. Her parents hadn't had money or status or social connections, but they had love, and they'd built a life on that foundation that had sustained them through everything. Judith slipped the ring onto her right hand and felt something shift inside her chest. Her mother had been brave enough to love despite the risks. Maybe it was time for Judith to be brave too. She picked up her phone and scrolled through David's messages until she found the most recent one, sent just an hour ago. "I know I have no right to ask this, but please don't give up on us. I believe we can figure this out together. I love you, Judith. That's not going away just because it's complicated." Judith stared at the screen for a long time, her heart pounding. Then she typed back, "I love you too. Can we talk?" The response came immediately, "I'm on my way." Judith looked around her tiny apartment, really looked at it for the first time in months. It was small and humble, but it was clean and warm and filled with books she loved. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And maybe that was enough to start with. Maybe love really could bridge the gap between two different worlds, if both people were willing to meet in the middle. Judith smoothed her hair, changed into her favorite sweater, and waited for the man she loved to show her that fairy tales could be real after all. 20 minutes later, Judith heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment, followed by a gentle knock. She opened the door to find David standing there, slightly out of breath, as if he'd run up the 3 flights of stairs. His hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Hi," he said softly, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "Hi," Judith replied, stepping aside to let him in. David entered her small apartment slowly, taking in the second-hand furniture, the stacks of books on every surface, the cheerful yellow curtains she'd sewn herself. When his gaze fell on the photo of Judith and her mother on the side table, his expression softened. "She looks like you," he said quietly. "People always said I looked like her." Judith picked up the photo, running her thumb across the glass. "She would have liked you." "How can you be sure?" Judith set the photo down and turned to face him. "Because you make me want to be brave again." David's breath caught. "Judith, let me say this first. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let Victoria's words get into my head. I'm sorry I ran away instead of fighting for us. And I'm sorry I made you feel like what we have isn't worth protecting." "You have nothing to apologize for," David said, taking a step closer. "Victoria was cruel and manipulative, and I should have protected you from her. I should have made it clear from the beginning that you matter more to me than any business deal or board meeting." "Do you? Matter more?" "Judith." David closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Today, I fired my business partner, probably destroyed several important relationships, and told my board of directors that they could vote me out if they didn't like my personal choices. All because I refused to live in a world where loving you is considered a mistake." Judith felt tears prick her eyes. "What about your company? Everything you've built?" "I didn't build it to impress people or accumulate wealth. I built it to honor my father's memory and make the world a little better." David's thumbs traced gentle circles across her knuckles, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. "You helped me remember who I really am, who I want to be." "And who is that?" "A man who chooses love over fear. A man who builds things that matter, not just things that sell. A man who's brave enough to fight for the woman who sees past his bank account to his heart." Judith looked up into his eyes and saw her future there, not perfect, not without challenges, but real and full of possibility. "I'm scared, David. Your world, the pressure, the judgment. Then we'll face it together," David said simply, "and we'll build our own world that makes sense for both of us." "What do you mean?" David smiled, and Judith saw a hint of the excited entrepreneur he must have been years ago before success had weighted him down with expectations. "I mean, I'm restructuring the company, refocusing on our original mission, making clean energy accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. It means smaller profit margins, but bigger impact." "The board will hate that." "The board works for me, not the other way around. And if they can't support the direction I want to take the company, they're welcome to find other investments." David's expression grew more serious. "It also means I'll be spending less time in boardrooms and more time in the field, working with contractors and small business owners, people like your friend Dolores." Judith's heart swelled. "Are you really going to do this?" "I'm really going to do this. But I don't want to do it alone." He dropped to his knee, and Judith's breath caught. "Judith, I know this is fast. I know it's crazy. But I also know I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "David, I'm not proposing," he said quickly, seeing her wide eyes. "Not yet. But I'm asking you to take a chance on us. Move in with me. Let me show you that love really can conquer the obstacles the world throws at us." Judith stared down at him, this powerful man kneeling in her tiny apartment, offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of. "Where would we live?" "Wherever you want. I have apartments in 3 cities. But honestly, I'd rather find something new, something that's ours, not mine." David stood, keeping hold of her hands. "Maybe a house with a garden where you can grow those flowers you arranged so beautifully. Maybe somewhere near the Children's Museum so you don't have a long commute to your new job." "You still think I should take the interview?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. But yes, I think you'd be amazing at that job. I think you'd change those kids' lives the same way you've changed mine." Judith felt the last of her resistance crumble. "What about the gossip, the articles? People will always question my motives for being with you." "Let them question. We know the truth, and anyone who matters will see what I see. A brilliant, compassionate, beautiful woman who makes me want to be better than I am." Judith leaned into his touch, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," David replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought I could love anyone." He leaned down and kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear of consequences. This was a kiss full of promises and possibility, a kiss that tasted like coming home. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Judith smiled up at him. "So what happens now?" "Now," David said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "I help you pack, and then we go shopping for a coffee machine for your Kittelvis." "Our Kittelvis," Judith corrected, and the word felt like magic on her lips. "Our Kittelvis," David agreed, spinning her around the small apartment until she was laughing breathlessly. 6 months later, Judith stood in the children's section of the Museum of Natural History, watching a group of 8-year-olds hang on her every word as she told them the story of a brave princess who saved her kingdom not with magic, but with kindness and courage. "And did the princess and the prince live happily ever after?" asked a little girl with pigtails. "They lived happily," she said, catching sight of David leaning against the doorway, watching her with pure adoration. "But more importantly, they lived authentically. They built a life based on love and shared values, and they used their resources to help others find their own happy endings." After the children left, David crossed the room and pulled Judith into his arms. "How was your day, princess?" "Perfect," Judith said, meaning it completely. "The new literacy program is launching next month, and we already have 50 families signed up." "And how's our other project coming along?" Judith grinned. "Dolores says the community center should be ready to open in the spring. The kids are going to love having a place to go after school." David had kept his promise to restructure his company, focusing on community-based clean energy projects. The first had been a partnership with Judith's old neighborhood, providing affordable solar installations for low-income families. Dolores had been so inspired that she'd organized a community group to establish an after-school program in the space above her diner. "I have something for you," David said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Judith's heart skipped, but David chuckled at her expression. "Not that. Not yet. But soon." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a book. "For the woman who taught me that the best stories are the ones we write together." As he fastened the necklace around her neck, Judith caught sight of their reflection in the museum's window. A man in jeans and a sweater, a woman in a simple dress, both of them glowing with contentment. They looked like what they were, two people who had found their place in the world by finding each other. "Thank you," Judith whispered, touching the pendant. "Thank you," David replied, "for teaching me that fairy tales aren't about finding someone to complete you. They're about finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself." Outside, the Chicago skyline sparkled in the setting sun, and somewhere in the city, a little girl who had been told she wasn't good enough was learning that she was wrong. Somewhere, a lonely man was discovering that wealth meant nothing without someone to share it with. And somewhere, love was proving that it really could conquer all, not by changing the world, but by changing the people brave enough to believe in it. Judith and David walked home hand in hand, ready to write the next chapter of their story together. As we reach the end of Judith and David's beautiful journey, I want to thank each and every one of you for being part of this community. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, and in ways we never imagined. What part of their story resonated most deeply with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, your own fairy tale might be just around the corner. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to transform everything. The end.